Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Barry Erickson, and I'm Community Engagement Coordinator at Wheaton Public Library. Tonight, we're delighted to bring you this presentation about garden insects. Andres Ortega is an ecologist with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. In this role, he manages and surveys the local insect population. Andres will provide a broad overview of the insects commonly encountered in our community's home gardens. We'll discover why they appear, whether to consider them beneficial or pests, and how they all play an important role in the garden ecosystem. With so much expertise and important information to share, I'm anxious to turn the mic over to you, Andres.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now while I talk. So again, thank you especially to Barry for the invitation to speak tonight. So again, as Barry said, my name's Andres Ortega, and I'm the invertebrate ecologist with the Forest Preserve District of DuPage County. So what this means is that my role at the district essentially is to manage any insect-related program we have at the district. And what that really means is that I interact with a wide variety of insects. Some we might consider good, something we want to protect or restore, or some that we might consider bad, some that are maybe a public health concern or are maybe causing some kind of harm to the environment. And what I've learned is that whether they are good or bad, all of these insects play a role in our own local ecosystem. And so tonight we're going to look at that concept, but we're going to do so in the framework of garden insects. And so we'll briefly look at a variety of insects we find in our home gardens, kind of understand what they look like, what they're doing there, what kind of role they fill, and really understand why, whether we consider them good or bad, they all do matter. So when you think of garden insects, what do you think of? And usually when I ask that question, I get a variety of different answers. And so sometimes the answers I get will be something beneficial that you want to see in your home garden, something like a monarch butterfly, right? It's a species that many of us plant milkweed specifically to help that and to attract them to our garden. The other one might be something like aphids. So you might think of something that you don't want to see in your garden, that you see it, and maybe it troubles you or you think it needs to be removed from your garden. Or sometimes there's a third class of insects or invertebrates, something like that orb weaver spider, and you can see that down in the bottom right. Those are usually very noticeable when we see them. They tend to be large, but we might not know exactly what they're doing there. Are they good? Are they bad? Are they helping? Are they hurting? And so the correct answer for what you think of as a garden insect is these and many, many more. There are way more garden insects than I could reasonably talk about tonight. And so to try and make it a little bit easier, a little bit more organized, I've broken it down into a few different groups of garden insects that we'll look at. And so one I think that's very beneficial for us are the milkweed communities. So like I said, many of us, myself included, plant milkweed around our home specifically to help monarch butterflies. But what we often find is that you're not just going to get monarchs on that milkweed. You're going to find other insects on it. And so we'll cover just a few of the species that we find on those milkweed plants. We'll move on from there and we'll look at pollinators. And specifically, we'll look at bees and butterflies, which are really the most effective pollinators we have in the area. And then finally, from there, we're going to move on and look at predatory insects. And so those are generally in that kind of third group I talked about where, you really notice them, you see them when they're around, but you're not necessarily sure what they're doing in your garden, what kind of benefit they're providing, or what harm they may be doing. And so we'll cover a few of those species as well. So starting with milkweed communities, when you look at all the different insects that can be found on milkweed communities are really divided into two different groups. So you'll have some that feed on leaves, and these are going to be things like, of course, monarch butterflies, But it can also be something like the milkweed tussock moth, and you can see those here, and we'll discuss those in a moment. And then the other group in the milkweed communities are those that we consider like sap or seed feeders. So these are insects that feed on those internal juices of the plant, either the internal juices of the seed pods or of the like the main stem of the plant. And so a couple examples would be like milkweed bugs or oleander aphids. So taking a closer look at the milkweed tussock moths, so these, as you can see, are very, very distinctive in the caterpillar phase. So they're orange, white, and black, and they look very what I would describe as hairy. And I say don't touch just as a side note. I always like to tell people that when you see an insect that is, to us, it might look soft and fuzzy, right? It might look hairy. Those are actually not hairs the way we think of them. Those are actually more like defensive spines or bristles. And so they're going to be harmful or irritating in some way. They're really like a defensive mechanism to prevent those insects from being eaten by a predator. So just always a side note, we see sometimes insects that we think of as soft. These also form what we call feeding clumps or groups. So what that means is when you see these insects, when you see these caterpillars, they often are not going to be by themselves. They're going to be in these large groups feeding on these milkweed leaves. And they do this really as a defense mechanism. The idea is that if you are feeding in a large group with a bunch of other caterpillars around you, if a predator comes and tries to feed on those caterpillars, you have greater likelihood of escaping predation because you're surrounded by so many other caterpillars, right? One interesting thing about these milkweed tussock moths is also that they prefer mature milkweed. So this is a little different than monarchs. What this means is that if in your home garden you have a milkweed plant that's been growing for a few years, that's a plant you're more likely to find milkweed tussock moths on. If you have a relatively fresh plant, something that you maybe just recently planted or just started growing from the seed, that would be something you're more likely to find a monarch caterpillar on. So don't get me wrong, there is definitely some overlap. You can find caterpillars of both species on a single plant, but they do kind of separate a little bit just based on the age of that milkweed. And then finally, when they mature, the milkweed tussock moth is, like most moths, it's a fairly drab insect. It's kind of a uniform gray. But if you look at that abdomen, you see that it does still retain some of that black, orange, and white coloration. So moving on to the seed or sap feeders, we have milkweed bugs. I would imagine at some point all of us have seen these before. These are extremely distinctive. They are usually red and black. Sometimes they might tend towards orange and black. They feed primarily on the seed pods. So you can see this adult right here is on the flowers, and sometimes you do find them on other parts of the plant. But by and large, you're going to find them on the seed pods, and you can see that in both of these circular images. And what you'll also notice about them is that they have an incomplete life cycle. So what that means is, again, looking at these two circular images, you see all those insects on there. Those are all milkweed bugs. They're just at different life stages. So an incomplete life cycle means that the larvae or the young of that particular insect look very similar to the adults. They have 6 legs, they have 2 antennae, they crawl, they feed on the same thing. So really they look like miniature, maybe not as deeply colored versions of what the adult milkweed bug looks like. This is in comparison to a complete life cycle, something like a monarch, where the caterpillar looks absolutely nothing like what the adult looks like. You have a flying adult and you have essentially like a worm-like larval stage. So a little bit different life cycle when it's an incomplete life cycle. And then finally, we have one that I get asked about pretty frequently every year, and these are the Oleander Aphids. And so these are, again, it's something I get a few calls on a year. It's one that people definitely generally think of as a bad insect. And usually it's because you find tons of them on your milkweed plants. So interestingly, they're actually not native to our region. They're from the Mediterranean, but at this point they've become cosmopolitan. So that means that, except for Antarctica, you can basically find them worldwide. They are generally very small and they tend to be orange or yellow. Sometimes they can take on a little bit of a red tint. And very much like ants, we don't normally think of them as flying insects, but there are some life stages that can fly. So again, just like ants, the idea is that when you have an aphid colony that reaches a certain size, it starts producing reproductive individuals, individuals that need to disperse away from that colony, mate, and start new colonies. And so that image that just popped up in the middle down here, you can see we have two aphids that actually have wings. So again, it's just something that we're not really used to seeing. We don't think of them as being able to fly. And by and large, that's true. But there are some life stages that are actually able to fly. And again, they are sap feeders. We find them very frequently on milkweed, but they are not exclusive to milkweed. They actually feed on about 50 to 60 different host plants. So you can find them on a variety of different plants, even in your home garden. So moving on to pollinators. And I usually ask people here what they think of when I say pollinator. And what I've noticed is this very interesting change. So about 5 years ago, when I would ask this question, the most common answer I would get for what a pollinator is a butterfly, something like a monarch butterfly. And that's not incorrect, but nowadays it has shifted and people generally recognize that bees are actually the most important and most effective pollinators in our area. And so both of those are true, but I really want to highlight that when I say what are pollinators, there are a huge number of pollinators out there. Many, many more than I could speak on tonight. And so, of course, there's butterflies, there's bees, there's also wasps and hornets, there's moths, beetles, flies, mosquitoes. All of these insects and more can and do function as pollinators. So again, I could give 5 presentations just on that subject, but for the purpose of tonight, I'm just going to focus on the 2 most common and most important groups of pollinators, which are going to be the butterflies and especially the bees. So with butterflies, the low-hanging fruit, the easy one to talk about is monarchs, and rightfully so. Monarchs are a very important species. They're a species in need. They're very noticeable. They're fantastic. But we do, I think, kind of hear about monarchs a lot, and we don't necessarily hear about other butterflies and other pollinators. So instead of talking about monarchs, I'm going to go through just a very, very short list of some of the more common butterflies we see in our garden. And again, these are really more my opinion than anything. Most of the insects on this list, you could really just trade out with almost any other butterfly in the area, and it would still be a fairly common species, meaning there's basically many more than what I'll be presenting today. So the first is the cabbage white. And so I do feel confident saying this is the most common butterfly in our area. It is a small white or off-white butterfly, about the size of maybe a quarter or a little bit larger when its wings are open. It is active pretty much the entire growing season from spring until fall, and they are generalist feeders. So the adults will feed on just about anything they can get to, any flower they can get to. So that'll be asters, mints, many other different flowers you'll see them feeding on. The viceroy is an interesting butterfly because it is what we consider a monarch mimic. And you can see that if you look at it, it has that very distinctive orange, black, and white coloration. So if you see a butterfly that looks like this, and you're not sure if it's a monarch or a viceroy, the easiest way to tell the difference is actually this cross vein on the hind wing. So whether it's flying or at rest, and whether you're looking at it with its wings open or wings closed, you should be able to see this cross vein. And you see it crosses all the other veins in that hind wing. That is absolutely a unique feature to viceroys. And so again, if you see that large orange, white, and black butterfly flying around, and you see that cross vein on the hind wing, you know you're looking at a viceroy. If you don't see that cross vein, you know you're looking at a monarch. And these don't feed on milkweed. They actually feed as caterpillars on more like tree species. So you're going to find them on cottonwoods and willows more frequently than anything else. So moving on, we have some of the largest and most notable butterflies in the area. These are going to be the swallowtails. And this image doesn't show it too well, but they're called swallowtails because they have these tail-like protrusions on their hind wings. So of course, that's where they get the name swallowtail. Though I often tell people not to necessarily use that as a key feature. And the reason for that is these tails, if you will, break off quite easily. And so you sometimes can see like a really large, showy butterfly that you would think is a swallowtail, but then you don't see those tails, and then you start getting confused and you're not sure what it is. But just be aware that's where it gets the name from. So the black swallowtail is a very unique, very large butterfly. You can identify it because it has two rows of yellow. So you see this outer row of yellow dots across all the wings, but then it also has this inner row of yellow as well. And I point that out because there are other swallowtails that look very similar, but they won't have that inner row of yellow. So we could consider that a key feature. And so the caterpillars are definitely something you could see in your home garden, especially if you have like an herb garden, because they feed exclusively on the carrot family. And so you'll see caterpillars on dill, on parsley, fennel, carrot. If you have some Queen Anne's lace growing around there, that's what the caterpillars would feed on. And then we also have the eastern tiger swallowtail. So you can see, of course, it gets that name from this black and yellow striping along much of its body. And here you can see those tails I mentioned a lot more vividly. And again, what's interesting about this one is if you look at the caterpillar, it's actually evolved to look similar to birds' droppings. And if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of evolutionary sense. So caterpillars are very vulnerable to predators. If you are a predator and you see something on a leaf that looks maybe like a bird's droppings, you're not going to feed on that. You're not going to focus on that as something to eat. And so it's just this unique evolutionary thing to not necessarily blend into their surroundings, but to really look like something that no predator would want to eat. So let's take a little bit of a step back. So we looked at milkweed communities and we went over a small list of insects. And then we looked at butterflies and we went over a small list of species. And I think doing that kind of rapid fire, going over a list of different things you see, I think it has a lot of benefits. But it can also be a little hard to absorb sometimes, when you're just going down these lists. When you get towards the bottom of the list, it gets a little bit hard to retain some of that. And I found that when you want to help a species, when you want to work with a species, insect or otherwise, you really need to know about that species. You need to know where they are. You need to know what they're doing. You need to know what they're feeding on. Again, a great example that I'll keep going back to is monarchs. We know monarchs need milkweed. We know monarchs overwinter primarily in Mexico. So knowing these things about their life history better helps us protect those species. And so I bring this all up because instead of giving you a list of bees, I'm just going to be talking about one bee, and that's the rusty patch bumblebee. So I always start off with this, and I make a point of saying that if you're going to work with a species, you need to be able to identify that species. It's one of like the key skills you have to have is you have to know what you're looking at. And so I would ask people which one of these is the rusty patch. And admittedly, I've probably made this too easy because almost everyone gets it right. And you can see the one on the left is in fact the rusty patch bumblebee. And what you'll see is it has this very distinctive kind of orangish, reddish patch on the abdomen. That's how you can key them out. Now, that being said, it looks very distinct on this picture, and it is. And for most life stages, it is. But if you look at these images on the bottom, you see that the one on the far left actually does not have that rusty colored patch. So that's actually a rusty patch queen, and they don't have that patch. So again, there are other characteristics you could use to identify it. I don't mean this to be like a super informative how to identify rusty patch. It's really just to highlight the need of knowing what you're looking at and knowing how to identify something. So why are we talking about rusty patch? Well, rusty patch is currently the only federally endangered bumblebee in the United States, and it was listed as endangered in 2017. And again, federally endangered means it has that absolute highest level of protection, legal protection in our country. So the reason rusty patch was listed in 2017 is because it's declined to about 0.1% or a tenth of a percent of its former range. So if you look at this map, you'll see all of these counties, primarily in the upper Midwest and the East, with that dark gray color where you can see the outline of the county. So those are its historic range. At some point in the past about 20 or 30 years, we had records of rusty patch bumblebee in all of those counties. Currently, rusty patch bumblebee is only known to exist in these very small areas of red surrounded by yellow. And to be clear, not the yellow, just the red. The yellow is like a buffer zone where they might exist, they probably exist, but we haven't seen them recently. So only these tiny dots of red in the upper Midwest are where we have current records of rusty patch bumblebee. So you can see there's this enormous decline in their range. In addition to that, even in places they still exist, there's been at least an 80% decline in their overall population. And so, unfortunately, it's not just one factor we can point at that's doing it. It's a combination of factors. It's going to be habitat loss. So what used to be like a nice farm field or a nice, field with nectar flowers is now a parking lot. It's going to be habitat degradation. So what used to be a nice field with flowers is still a field, but now it's overrun by invasive plants and isn't really as usable by rusty patch. And of course, pesticide use definitely has an impact on these, as well as many other pollinators. The overuse and misuse of pesticides is known to, cause many pollinator populations to go down. So unfortunately, like I said, it's not just one thing. It's kind of this perfect storm of things affecting rusty patch bumblebee. So again, as I mentioned, if we want to help something, if we want to help a species, we need to know where they are and what they're doing. And so we need to look at what we call their life history. So let's start about 2 months ago. So 2 months ago, we're in the middle of winter. We have rusty patch here in Illinois in the middle of winter. What we have are solitary queens, so just queen bees by themselves, and they're hibernating somewhere. We don't really know where. It might be, in woodlands, under logs. It might be in old rodent burrows. It might be in hay piles, somewhere where they can escape the elements and escape predators. But other than that, we're not exactly sure where they are. But come spring, so right about this time of year, those solitary queens wake up, and the first thing they need to do is feed. They haven't had anything to eat in about 4 to 6 months. And so they need to feed on a nectar plant very quickly. And so that's a key requirement that we know they need is much earlier than other bees. They need to be able to take nectar pretty quickly. And so if you've ever been in a woodland in spring, and you see, wild geranium, you see Virginia waterleaf, you see these early spring ephemerals, that's what Rusty Patch depends on. So those queens need to feed right away. Once they do, the queens fly away and they find somewhere to start a new colony. And again, we don't know exactly where they're starting these colonies. To my awareness, no one's ever found a Rusty Patch colony. But again, we suspect they're probably in like old rodent burrows more likely than not, or, like old fence lines. Again, somewhere underground where they're relatively protected. So the queen starts this colony and starts producing female workers. And so these are, the main bees that go out, collect pollen, collect nectar, and bring it back to the nest. Summer is basically status quo. So same basic process. The queen is in the hive, continues to produce these female workers. But the second habitat requirement we absolutely know is they still need nectar flowers. Even after those spring ephemerals are gone, they need nectar flowers throughout the rest of the summer. In fall, this is when we really start seeing things change around. So again, third habitat requirement we know is they need flowers in fall, especially early fall as well. And what starts happening is these queens now, instead of just producing female workers, they start producing males and new queens. So these reproductive males and reproductive queens, females, fly away from the nest, find each other, mate, and then everything dies. The old queen dies, the colony dies, the males die, and all you're left with are these new queens that are now holding on to fertilized eggs, and then they go and overwinter, and the cycle starts again. So why Rusty Patch? And it's a question I get whenever we really focus on an endangered species or really just one species at a time. And there's a few ways I would answer why we're focused on Rusty Patch. So a lot of the time when we think of an endangered species, we think of something very rare, very hard to find, maybe like out in the middle of nowhere, out, in a very pristine area, somewhere like way off the beaten path. And I would say for some endangered species, that's absolutely true. But for Rusty Patch, it's actually very different. We often find them in urban areas and home gardens. And so a great just little anecdote I give for this is about 3 years ago, it was getting close to fall, and I had spent probably about 3 weeks looking for Rusty Patch Bumblebee. And again, I was going in these way out areas, very nice locations, but way off the beaten path, way in the depths of some of our larger preserves, every day looking for them, and I'm not finding them. I'm just not seeing them anywhere. And then as I'm doing that, one day I get a call from one of my seasonal employees, and she was in a parking lot and had to take a phone call. So as she was standing in that parking lot taking her phone call, a bee flew up to one of the plants in the parking lot island, and she saw it was a Rusty Patch Bumblebee. And she was able to even get a photo of it. So we could definitely confirm that it was in fact Rusty Patch, just flying right next to her in that parking lot after I had been, searching for them for 3 weeks in really, really nice natural areas. So just kind of keep in mind that this is absolutely a species that you can see at your home, you can see in your local park, you can see in a preserve. It is also important to note that the Midwest, in particular Illinois and Minnesota, are the current hotspots of the species. So if we went back to that map I showed you, you can see Northeast Illinois is absolutely a hotspot for Rusty Patch right now. So not only is it an endangered species that can occur where we occur, but it's also an endangered species that exists in our part of the world, in our part of the Midwest. And again, sometimes when I talk about endangered species, I work with an endangered dragonfly species. It can be kind of hard to talk about that one because it is so specific in its habitat requirements. It has such specific needs that it is admittedly very difficult for your average homeowner to directly help that species. It's hard for me to think of ways to tell people how they can help something that is only found in very remote areas. But Rusty Patch is something that you can help. So there's a few ways to do this. One thing I'd recommend is planting native, particularly native prairie species of plants. And a great resource for this would be the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service plant lists, or you can also get on the Xerces Society and look up their plant lists. You can also avoid using pesticides. And I'll make a little bit of a point about this later in that I I really don't like telling people what to do in their home garden. I don't like telling them what they can and can't use. But I do say if it is possible to accomplish your goals without using pesticides, I would definitely recommend that. And you'll be benefiting not just Rusty Patch, but many other pollinators as well. And finally, you can join a citizen science program. Something like Bee Spotter is fantastic. It's run by the University of Illinois. And it's a very simple concept where you can go, you can register for free. And all they're asking is that when you see a bee, particularly like a bumblebee, you take a photo of it. You can upload that photo onto the Bee Spotter website. You can add in the location information. Their experts can help you identify it. And by doing that, you really build this location information, again, not just for Rusty Patch, but for all the other bees we have in the area. So finally, we'll move on to the last group that I wanted to discuss, and these are the predatory insects. So again, these are really a diverse group of insects. You know, when you say predatory insects, you could mean a lot of different things. But predatory insects fill a number of roles in your home garden. So one thing they absolutely can do is consume bad insects. And what you see here, this image on the top right, is a lacewing larvae. And those, if you've never seen them, lacewing adults are those really small green flying insects that sometimes you find maybe outside of your porch light in the early morning. The larvae are predatory, and you can see what it's doing there is actually eating an aphid. They are well known to really go through and devour aphids. So one benefit to predatory insects in your home garden is they do consume what we would consider as the bad insects. They themselves are also a critical part of the ecosystem. So, of course, they are predators, but they are also prey for larger animals, you know, things like birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians. These predatory insects kind of fill both of those roles as predator and prey. So they are really considered a critical component of any healthy, not just home garden, but really any healthy ecosystem. And we don't really think of them like this a lot, but they can actually also function as pollinators. So if you look at that image on the bottom left, that is what we call a robber fly. It is actually a fly, you know, what we'd consider a true fly, like close to a house fly. They tend to be very large. You can identify them because it looks like it has this very hairy, almost like bearded face. So what robber flies do is they will rest, as you see, on a flower, and they wait. They wait for another insect to fly by. When that insect flies by, the robber fly lifts off, grabs that insect, feeds on it, and then goes and lands on another flower to wait for its next meal. But if you think about it, when it's on, say, this flower, we'll call it flower number one. As it's resting on flower number one, it's collecting a little bit of pollen on its legs and on its body. It goes, it flies off, gets its prey, and then lands on, we'll say, flower number two. When it lands on flower number two, it's depositing some of that pollen. So I would never tell you that they are as effective or as efficient pollinators as, bees or butterflies, but predatory insects do act as pollinators to some extent. So the first predatory insect I really want to look at is one I hear about quite a bit, and one I think the vast majority of home gardeners are quite familiar with, and those are the mantids, or, like a praying mantis. And so I think many of us have seen this before. This is what we call an ootheca. So this is an egg case of a mantis. And I believe there are even like some home garden centers that will sell these specifically to put in your garden as kind of like a biocontrol, as something you want in your garden that will somehow help you control other less beneficial species. So one thing I like to point out with that is almost certainly every mantis you've seen in the area, every egg sac you've seen in the area is actually going to be the Chinese mantis. So these are by far the most common. They are, as you can tell by the name, not native to North America. They're from Asia. So in that sense, they're invasive, but we don't consider them like an invasive species, in that they don't cause a lot of harm to the environment. They really have found their own little niche, their little area to exist in. And so they're really like naturalized at this point, is what I'm getting at. You can see they are very large insects. A full-grown mantis, Chinese mantis, is going to be about 3 to 4 inches long. It's going to be brown, and it'll have that green stripe on it, though sometimes they will be all green as well. And they're considered generalist predators. So what that means is that basically if they can catch it and hold on to it, they'll eat it. And these can be other mantids, it can be other insects. You can even get online and find videos of not necessarily the Chinese mantis, but other like tropical mantids eating small birds or small amphibians as well. So they're very, very good hunters, very strong insects, and are able to catch a wide variety of prey. The only native mantis we have in the area is the Carolina mantis. And so you can see that on the bottom. And it's hard to get a sense of scale, but these are generally much smaller than the Chinese mantis. And really, we don't often see them up here. I would say in my years at the district, I've never seen one this far north. And I would venture to guess that if you see a mantis anywhere north of about central Illinois, it's going to be the Chinese mantis. The Carolina mantis is just not really adapted for these really cold winters we get up here. So you only really see them in like central and southern Illinois. So spiders are also very common in home gardens, admittedly not insects, but invertebrates. So, we'll give them a pass. And I get quite a few calls about these every year. And it's understandable. They are very common. I would say one of the most common, at least that I personally hear about, are going to be the orb weavers. So you can see the orb weavers are these two. There are many, many other orb weavers. There are some, especially like the black and yellow ones, people are very familiar with. And one way to tell it's an orb weaver beyond their, generally large size is they weave what I usually call like a Charlotte's web type web. So they're going to be the ones that have these very spread out, very wide, single plane webs. So it's not like a cobweb or anything like that. It's like one single flat web stretched out. You can also pretty commonly find grass spiders. Sometimes they're called funnel web spiders for obvious reasons, if you look at that image on the bottom right. So grass spiders are also found in gardens, but they're usually going to be like ground level. They're going to make these funnel-shaped webs in the grass, or maybe, if you have like bricks or something in your yard, any kind of structure, they'll make that funnel in between them. They'll wait for an insect to come and kind of jiggle on that web, and then they'll come shooting out of that funnel, grab it, and bring it back down. So I always tell people when they ask about spiders and ask if they're harmful, I make a point that I get it. I think it's a very natural human reaction to see a spider and get scared by it, get freaked out by it, right? You see something large, you see something that you might interpret as scary. And even me, I would be lying if I said I'm above that all of the time. Sometimes they can startle you. But what I tell people is the vast majority of spiders in our area are harmless. What that means is if you leave it alone, it will do the same. I mean, you got to think about it. You're looking, or they are looking at something that's, a few thousand times larger than they are. They don't want to pick a fight with you. They just want to be left alone and they'll leave you alone. So that's my usual recommendation for spiders. And then the last one we'll look at tonight are the ladybird beetles. And I'm still fighting growing up calling them ladybugs, and I still call them ladybugs, but the proper terminology is generally ladybird beetles because they are in fact beetles. So as a general rule of thumb, the red ones, these deep red ones, are the natives, whereas these orange or yellow ones are non-native. And it's interesting to think about because in my history, in my time at the district, it's been very rare that I see the native species. Almost never do I see these native ladybugs anymore. Primarily, I'm just seeing the invasive ladybird beetles. And so again, the most common native we have is the nine-spotted. So if you see a ladybird beetle that is deep red and has, if you counted them, it does have 9 black spots on it, that would be the native species. Anything else, if it's lighter colored or has more spots, it's going to be a non-native. So both adults and the larvae, and you can see the larvae right here, eat small insects and eggs. And so just like that lacewing I showed you, that lacewing larvae, this larva is actually eating an aphid. And so you'll find them on the same leaves and the same plants with aphids, consuming a lot of those, again, what we consider negative insects. And as a fair warning, the Asian lady beetles will actually give you a little bit of a bite. And if you hold it in your hand, they're the ones that you'll notice if you crush them or hold them, they give off a really like pungent odor. And so again, it's just a defense mechanism that you don't really see in the native species. The Asian variety is a lot more, has a lot more defensive than the native ones do. So I'd like to just wrap it up and take a quick look at my personal opinion of why all of these, the aphids, the butterflies, the bees, why they all matter. So the main point I want to make is that in your home garden, most of them are just causing cosmetic damage. What I mean by that is they rarely actually damage the plants. So you might see a milkweed plant and it's just like covered in aphids and you think it's causing all this harm. But really, I would highlight that it would take an enormous amount of aphids to actually damage the plant. What you're seeing is probably just superficial cosmetic damage. As I mentioned, all of them play a role. So they can be pollinators of milkweed and other plants, they can be predators, they can be prey. I really want to strike that point home because if you remove something from the ecosystem, you might be causing a lot more damage than you realize. If you remove aphids from a plant, yeah, it might superficially benefit that plant, but now you might be depriving all of these other insects of a stable prey base. And so you have the potential to cause these cascading effects without even realizing it. And so for that reason, I don't ever really recommend removing anything from your home garden unless it is like truly a safety issue. Other than that, I don't recommend removals. But like I said before, I don't like telling people what they can and can't do in their home garden. So if you choose to remove any insects from your garden, you want to do so in the gentlest, softest way possible. Don't use chemicals. Don't use sprays. Don't use a vacuum. Just gently brush them off, remove them, and if possible, place them somewhere else. And especially if you're doing this on milkweed, make sure that you're not harming any monarch eggs or caterpillars that are also on those same leaves. And that is the end of my presentation. I will leave you with an image of not myself, but my supervisor, Tom, who is showing the enthusiasm that I wish we all had when we were working with insects. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and see if we have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Andres. This has been great information. We do have a couple of questions, and
Sure.
I will remind people to go ahead and pop open their Q&A screen if they haven't done that already so that they can enter additional questions. But let's get to some of these. The first few are about those rusty patch bumblebees. Could you repeat what early flowering plants are enjoyed by them? By that queen bee, especially after hibernating all winter.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, there are great lists available from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as well as the Xerces Society that I bring that up because they'll get more specific than I can. But the ones that spring to mind would be wild onion, it would be wild geranium, Virginia bluebells, Virginia waterleaf, bloodroot are all the ones that spring to mind quickly. And again, if you've been out in a woodland, specifically in early spring, they're what we would call the spring ephemerals. Another one I can think of is shooting star. That's another fantastic one for rusty patch.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I know that you mentioned that bee spotter site. Does the Forest Preserve also want to know if someone sees a rusty patch bee?
Yeah, like on a personal level, I would love to hear about it. But seriously, if you do find what you think of as a rusty patch, and really whether it's on district property or not, of course, I'm most interested in what we would find on district property. But I would invite anyone, if you find something that you think is a rusty patch bumblebee and you've kind of, you've gone through your identification and you feel pretty confident about it, it doesn't hurt me at all to send a photo to me. And Barry, please share my email with anyone that's interested. Send me that photo and I would love to look at it, let you know if you are in fact looking at rusty patch and just kind of talk to you a little bit more about it. But yes, I would love to know about that.
Okay, great. Great. Someone else is asking, what is the best local milkweed variety to grow in our gardens here in DuPage County?
That is a great question. And it's a pretty involved subject. So what I would say is this. Any of our native milkweeds are are pretty good. Common milkweed is pretty easy. The one I always lean to as really fitting in well in a home garden is butterfly weed. Okay, so butterfly milkweed. But what I would say with that too is be very careful, not just that you're getting a native milkweed, right? Because I've seen people they'll order like tropical milkweed from Florida and they'll plant it here. Obviously, that's not a native species. But even more than that, try and get a local genotype. So what that means is if you go to, wherever and you go and get milkweed seeds or milkweed plugs, make sure that not just it's a native species, but that it was originated from here as well. So that we know it's that what we would call the local genotype. But that's a very involved answer for saying probably butterfly weed would be my go-to.
Okay, great. Here's another question. Is there any effective treatment for red-necked cane borers on raspberries?
That is definitely one that I'm not familiar with. So I can't answer that right now, but if whomever asked that question would like to reach out separately in email, I can work with, we have a plant ecologist, and sometimes when it comes to these really what we would consider like pests, insect pests on plants, he and I work together. So he might have more information. So I can definitely try and answer that later.
Okay, Great, thank you. Yes, and just as a reminder to everyone, this program is being recorded, so it will be on our YouTube page, and we will be also sending out a number of resources for you, as well as that email address that you mentioned to everyone who's registered to the program. Next question. Yellow jacket wasps, are they good or bad? This person says that they had them in raised beds in the garden for the last couple of years, but by the end of the season, an animal had attacked the nest, and they're wondering even what animal might have attacked them.
Pretty brave one. I would say pretty brave one. No, that's an excellent question, and that is one I get pretty frequently. And it's great that people are concerned, even with yellow jackets. You know, we all hear about bees being in decline, right? And so we wonder if that goes to yellow jackets. I love insects, but I'll be the first to tell you that the yellow jackets are doing so well. They're not imperiled, they're not in danger or anything like that. And absolutely, that is when it becomes a safety issue for a lot of people, right? So I think it is fine to remove yellow jackets from anywhere near your home because they are well known to be very aggressive. And like I said, they are not the imperiled species. So definitely, if that occurs again, I would recommend reaching out to like a pest control specialist. They'll be able to safely remove it. I never recommend people do it on their own. And as for what animal could attack a yellow jacket nest, there are some mammals that are strong enough and have thick enough fur that they could go for a yellow jacket. I mean, honestly, it's not unreasonable to think of like a raccoon or a possum going after a yellow jacket nest. So it could have been one of those.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Someone else says, they love dragonflies. What's the endangered dragonfly's name that you referenced during the presentation?
Yeah, it's the Heinz emerald dragonfly. So again, it's the only federally endangered dragonfly species we have, and it does exist in DuPage County, as well as like Will County and Cook County, basically along the Des Plaines River. Very interesting species. I work quite a bit with it every day. But it is, as I mentioned, one of those hard ones to talk about because it's so rare and so specific in what it needs. It's very difficult to tell people how they can help or even how they can get out and see it. But it is the Heinz emerald dragonfly.
Okay, thank you. Next person asks, that they've seen the ladybird beetles sold for garden defense. Are they going to be, are those going to be natives and beneficial, or just adding more to the invasives?
I would say the latter instead of the former. So similar to what happens with those mantid egg sacs, those ootheca, almost certainly they're going to be non-native. What they are doing is they're advertising it as a control. For the ladybird beetles, the idea would be that they're controlling aphids. For the mantids, it would be that they're controlling like mosquitoes and other insects. Um, I wouldn't not necessarily recommend purchasing them. Again, number one, because you don't know exactly what you're getting, and I think there's a good chance they're non-native. And number two, I always point out to people like you could fill your garden with ladybird beetles, and it's still probably not going to be enough to truly control aphids the way that maybe they're advertised as such.
Okay, thank you. And this question is slightly related. The person says we have an issue with Japanese beetles in our home garden, especially with their roses. What would you recommend?
So same, I get that problem too at my house. They do make traps for Japanese beetles. So these are you can buy them at most garden centers, you can buy them online. And the traps are pretty safe because what it is a pheromone that is pretty unique to those beetles. So it won't really attract anything else. And I point that out because a lot of the time when we talk about a trap, my number one concern is that you're going to trap something you didn't mean to, what we call bycatch. Um, but these Japanese beetle traps are pretty effective at capturing Japanese beetles and not much else. The one thing I would say about them is you should place these traps away from the plants you want to protect. The idea is that they will sense or smell this pheromone and be drawn away from those plants into the trap.
Okay, great. Another question, what um, what in the world are ticks good for, and what is our best defense?
Oh my goodness. I'm glad that you asked that, because it is another one I work closely with. Ticks make it pretty hard to justify, but I do tell people the truth that they are a natural feature of the landscape. Now, that's not going to make you feel better, but they are a huge prey item for other beneficial animals. I think a lot of us have heard that possums in particular heavily depend on ticks as like a prey base. And possums do serve many purposes on their own. So they are prey, they do serve a purpose. Your best defense against ticks, more than anything else, is just going to be awareness of where you are. So if you're in tick habitat, for the black-legged tick, that would be in a woodland. And if you're off trail, you are increasing your risk of bites. So the number one thing, no matter where you are, woodland, prairie, really sunny day, really bad day, the best defense is checking yourself frequently. So you have to realize that ticks don't bite you right away. So if you find a tick that's been attached, that's bitten you, it's probably been on you for a few hours, crawling around looking for like a really good spot to bite. So if you check yourself frequently, after you go outside, when you get in the car, check yourself. When you get home, check yourself again. Then you're really increasing your chances that you can get that tick off before it actually bites you.
Okay. Another question came in about yellow jackets. Someone is asking, what about ground yellow jackets, and is that species beneficial?
Yeah, so this is something I've worked on a lot. The terminology, yellow jacket, ground hornet, wasp, all get used kind of interchangeably. So really, when someone says yellow jacket and when someone says ground hornet, they're almost certainly talking about the same thing. And so my response would be the same as the previous, where are they beneficial? To some extent, they are. But when it becomes a risk to your health, if you're allergic, I have two kids at home, so I wouldn't want them by my house, of course. Um, and at least be reassured that if you do have them removed, they're very, very stable. Removing one nest, removing 100 nests won't impact the population at all.
Okay. Someone asks, how is DuPage County trying to improve the insect health in our community? For example, perhaps organic controls being used on a wider scale?
Oh my goodness, I love that question. There's a lot of ways. Again, I could probably talk for quite a while about that. So I will say, to our credit as the insect guy, that the district as a whole really takes insect and pollinator health very seriously. So just like the short list of what we do, when we are restoring a habitat, we're doing it with insects and pollinators in mind. We're making sure we're planting the plants they need, that it's the local genotype and native species. Right around now, you'll actually see these controlled fires. So you might be outside and you might see like a controlled burn in a preserve. That actually directly benefits pollinators because that burn is getting rid of those invasive plants and promoting native plants. Um, we have specialized programs. I'm actually raising the Heinz Emerald Dragonfly in captivity to release them back out in the wild, amongst a few others. So we have these specialized programs. And more to the point of like the organics, we are incredibly careful and cognizant of what we use when it comes to herbicides. By and large, we don't really use pesticides. And when we use herbicides, again, we're very careful about what we're using, how we're using it, where we're using it in what we call an integrated pest management way, where we're really limiting how much we're using products like that. And if we are, they're the safest that you can reasonably use. So if the interested party would like to hear more, I'd be more than happy to give them more specific details about what we're doing.
Okay, and we just have maybe one or two more questions. Someone asks, is there an insect nest removal service in DuPage County that you would recommend? For example, safely removing a beehive from an attic.
Yeah, I don't recommend particular companies, of course, but I would say if it is a pest, there are a wide variety of companies, say Orkin as just one example, that are very professional and can help remove them. If it is a honeybee colony, pest removal companies won't touch that, because honeybees are imperiled. They don't want to kill them, so it's a great thing they won't touch it. If it were a honeybee colony, I would recommend just researching what beekeeper organizations are in your area. I know a big one in general is like the Chicago or Chicagoland Beekeepers Association. And they would be the group that would do like a honeybee colony removal, more so than like a pest control company.
Okay, and we've got a couple more questions that just came in. Someone asks, are galls most commonly caused by the gall wasp? Or maybe, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And is the treatment only necessary in older trees?
I would say a lot of them are caused by the wasp. There are a few different reasons why a tree can get galls, but yeah, in my experience, when you see a gall, it's probably going to be a wasp or a fly. And the second part of it was regarding treatments, is are they necessary?
Right.
That one's really hard to say. I think the general consensus is that by and large, galls are pretty benign. Again, it would depend very specifically on what insect species is causing the gall. But I would say, at least in the district, when we see a gall or we see a tree with galls, we don't generally do any kind of treatments on that tree. So usually they're benign, is what I would say.
Okay. And someone asks, any tips for dealing with the forecasted cicadas this summer?
Yeah, I've been getting a few calls about that. So the cicadas this summer, we just to remind people, we always have cicadas, right? There's two groups. We have the annual cicadas. So they're the ones you hear cicadas every year, right? Those are the annual. And then we have the periodic or periodical cicadas, the 13-year and the 17-year. So we're going to have the annual as we normally do. The periodic cicadas are not necessarily going to be in our area. So if you look, there are actually a number of maps online that show really in Illinois, it's going to be mostly in 4 counties in eastern Illinois, down by like Vermilion County, right on the Indiana border. That's where we're expecting to see them. So am I concerned for our area that we're going to have to plug our ears for a few months? Not really. But I always do like to add in that there is a chance that there are these like isolated pockets that might be in our area. So I wouldn't count on it. I would, if I were a gambling man, I would not put money on them being in abundance in DuPage County, but be prepared that you might be in a preserve or a park and be like, I hear a slightly different cicada call. It would be the annual or the periodic cicadas.
Okay. And this last question I think is very appropriate because of some of the links that you've provided to send out. Someone is asking regarding the native plant sale that the Forest Preserve is providing. Are these all local grown? And then perhaps anything else you'd like to say about that?
Oh my gosh, yeah. So that I don't work incredibly closely with the plant sale every year, but when I've been blown away in how much care they take in making sure that what we sell is not just native, but local. And I don't quote me on this, but I believe the criteria is that it has to be local within about 50 to 100 miles of DuPage County. So again, that's that whole like common milkweed. Common milkweed is native, but if you're shipping it from California, it's not a local genotype. everything we sell is what we would consider local genotype. And we make sure that everything we sell is as ecologically safe as possible. So one thing we make sure is that we never purchase anything unless we've gotten a guarantee that it's not been treated with like a neonicotinoid, which is a very, very harmful class of pesticides that a lot of people will even like treat seeds with. So unless we're absolutely sure that it's clean, if you will, we won't purchase it. So I would say, on a personal and professional level, be very reassured that anything you get at the plant sale is safe and local.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much, Andres. We want to thank you and the First Preserve District of DuPage County for generously giving your time and effort to put together this presentation. As I had mentioned, the program has been recorded and will be available on the library's YouTube page within about a week. And tonight I will be sending out a list of resources and websites, the email address that we've mentioned, and the link to that plant sale. All of those things will be going out to everyone who has registered for this program. If you are watching the recording of this presentation, you can ask for those resources and links by emailing me at ce@wheatonlibrary.org. That's CE for community engagement at wheatonlibrary.org. So thank you so much again for being here tonight and for answering all of our questions. With that, we will say goodnight. Thank you to everyone who
very
has
much.
joined us, and everyone take care. Wishing you well in your gardens this spring, and we hope to see you again soon.